Sure.
So welcome to this Cycling Life Leadership Bytes. I'm delighted today to welcome Andrew Bruce. Andrew is the current world champion in the 20 kilometre points race on the track. He was also silver last year in the pursuit in Manchester, and he became the Masters champion also on the road for the Scottish National Championship. So terrific to have you here. I've raced against this guy on the track, which was it was a tough experience. We can maybe talk about that along the way, Andy. But what I'd love to hear from you to start with is just, how, to what extent has sport been part of your life, and how did you come to cycling?
Good question. So thanks for the intro. It's great to be here. So I always did sport as a kid at school. The usual kind of stuff in Scotland. We play rugby and football. Always loved playing on my bike, but it was never racing. It was just, as kids do, get out on the bike and bomb about with your mates. Had what you'd call back then a racer. Also had a BMX, which I think had a big input into learning bike handling skills, bunny hopping and wheeling and trying to do stunts without falling off too often.
Yeah.
But then after university, where I played a lot of table tennis, became rather sedentary. The usual: you get a car, you get a job, spend the rest of your life sitting on your backside, not doing very much.
Right. So I understand you were even a smoker at one point, right? So
for my sins, yeah. I started smoking because all my friends were doing it.
Right.
So that was, stupidly looking back, when I was old enough to know better. I was 18, I was at university, had really long hair, it was way down my back, into the rock scene. So I was drinking beer, but not drinking heavily, but drinking beer, smoking, playing pinball, and listening to heavy metal.
Wow. And then I understand. So, I mean, clearly you always, like you said, messed around with your bike and stuff. But I mean, you bought your first racing bike in 2011. So how old were you then, and what sort of triggered that interest in cycling?
So bizarrely, I think I would have been just about turning 40. So I was 39 when I got the bike. And I was conscious of the fact that I was doing no exercise. And although I wasn't overweight, I recognised I wasn't fit. And the company I was working for started a cycle to work scheme where you can buy a bicycle and it's tax efficient, so you avoid the tax on it. So I just did that and started commuting.
Wow. And then you decided to have a crack at road racing in Scotland. And so that must have been pretty scary, because I mean, I know how tough it is here, when I arrived in Belgium, and then I was turning up to races, and I didn't yet have my UCI license. So if you're kind of an amateur, they give you a coloured number, to indicate that you're kind of a novice. I remember just getting shouted at by guys and stuff like that. I mean, how was that experience for you? Because actually, I did have experience as a road cyclist as a junior. But how about for you? You're completely new to it. So how was that experience of your first road races and getting into the scene?
It was a mixture of terror and excitement. I'd been doing time trialing for a year in my local club, so that's where the competitive stuff started. But had zero support when I went to my first road race, and I had sign on. I remember the guy saying, have you raced before? I think it was pretty obvious I hadn't.
Right.
I said no. And he says, so I'll give you two bits of advice. Don't look around you or behind you, just keep your eyes forward, and there'll be lots of shouting, just ignore it. Didn't quite appreciate a lot of the shouting would be directed at me.
Right. Which is an interesting point, because one of the things that I mean, clearly we're passionate about at This Cycling Life is encouraging people into the sport. However, I do sense sometimes that there's a bit of elitism. For people who've been in the sport a long time, I get a sense sometimes that we're not as welcoming, we're not as encouraging as we might be. What was your experience there?
Absolutely the same. So you very quickly recognise that there's an in group and an out group, just like there is in all walks of life. And I think a lot of my competitiveness was a desire to get acceptance into the in group, to get recognised as I'm not just an idiot, or as we say in the UK, a chopper.
Right.
Which I probably was in the first couple of years. But you get stuck in and you start learning the skills, you start actually training, and so I had always had this desire to try and actually show folks that I could be a decent bike rider.
Right.
And I
And
suppose a big chunk of it's just acceptance.
I mean, how long did it take you to realize that actually maybe you did have, a bit of talent? We always joke on This Cycling Life, we say, if you want to become a good bike rider, you should choose your parents very carefully. But as I understand it, I mean, you didn't come from a family of cyclists. You didn't have, that sort of heritage. So when did you start to realize that actually maybe, you've got an engine, I mean, clearly you have physiological talent, because you wouldn't have got where you are now without that. How long did that take to start to realize? Because you were losing weight, you were developing your fitness.
I think there were two moments of epiphany. There was one towards I think it was actually after a road race, probably in my first year of racing, but later on, when one of the other guys commented that you need to learn your tactics. You can certainly push the pedals. Those were his words. Like, okay. So he recognised that you've got a bit of strength, you just need to learn how to use it. And the other epiphany was actually in a hill climb, when halfway up the roughly 8-minute climb, when I was dying a death, and I looked down at my Garmin and recognised you've only really got about 3 minutes more of suffering and pain to go.
Right.
And dug in and got a good time. And the epiphany was realizing how much of the sport is mental as well as physical. So you're suffering, you're hurting, but it's temporary.
Yeah. So what then sparked your interest in track racing? I mean, because clearly you've already said you were terrified to get into road races, and yet then you get yourself on a 250-meter board track with a 40% bank. And so what triggered that interest, and did you go through that whole experience of fear, excitement again? How did that evolve?
So another interesting one. So I was actually racing in Mallorca at the Masters a couple of years ago, when my teammate Jason asked if I was racing the Scottish Track Champs, which is in 4 weeks' time. And I said, well, I've never raced on the track, although I am accredited, and I don't even have a track bike. I wouldn't want to cause death and destruction in the bunch. And he said, well, you could always race the individual pursuit. And the worst that happens is you just damage yourself. Right. So long story short, 4 weeks later, I'd built up a track bike, done a few trials on the track, and entered the vets individual pursuit, so 3K individual pursuit. And ended up coming silver behind my teammate Jason, which I thought was appropriate.
Sure. And then so that clearly, so when was that? What year was that when you had your first ride on the track?
So that would have been 2017.
2017. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So then.
I think 2017, yeah.
2017. Okay. So then, I mean, clearly you and I met in Manchester, and I saw you do the pursuit, which was an incredible ride. I mean, you got the silver medal there. And then, I came up against you in the points race, and it was just impressive, and just for the audience to understand, the 20-kilometer points race is an event where we're doing about 80 laps of the track, 250 meters, of course, and then around every 5 laps you have to sprint for points. But in that race, in the final, where I raced together with Andy, I think we had an average speed of around 51 kilometers per hour, right? 51.5, something like that.
Right.
So it's an incredible experience. I mean, to be racing at that speed. Andy, how did you prepare for that? Because, clearly you're working, you work for Cisco Juniper, as I understand, you're traveling a lot with your work. So how did you prepare that build up leading to Manchester 2019?
Yeah, so you're right. I work for Cisco and travel globally, and that does take its toll. But I've got an excellent coach, and we use Training Peaks to keep things synchronized.
Yep.
And so my coach focuses my training on the up and coming events, and so in the run up to Manchester, it was a case of the real horrible type training didn't start until about 6 weeks before, because earlier than that, you're not going to have much more benefit.
Okay. So this is saying you already had it. Clearly, you've been doing your time trials, you've been doing your racing, so you've got that base level of fitness. You've got your core. You've done all that hard work, I guess, in the years before, and then you're talking now about that period. Great. Okay. Please say more. Mm.
So it's all the horrible stuff that everybody hates to do, 45, 50-minute sessions, but they're just so horrific you just want to crawl off the bike and die afterwards.
Yeah,
But the
yeah,
benefits are huge. And then the race itself, the way the events staggered at the Worlds had the individual pursuit first, and then it was the bunch races, scratch, then points, and then I was doing team pursuit. So the IP was my target. It was the one I wanted to win gold, and made a
that's
mess in the final.
Individual pursuit. That's and what distance is that? That's
3K.
3K. I didn't ride the pursuit.
Yeah. So,
but the question I guess I'm getting at is, I understand that clearly, there was this 6-week period where you're doing all the hard work, but I mean, were you also traveling at that time? So, I mean, if you've got to do, I don't know, some intensive micro intervals or some threshold stuff, or how do you fit that in when you might be, because you mentioned to me, you might be flying off to Colombia or somewhere else in the world, staying at a hotel. How do you do that?
Well, I tried to limit my travel, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. I think the key thing is to make sure, two key things. One is to make sure you've got a hotel that has a decent gym, which isn't always possible, but also to make time. So even though you're traveling, once you're at your destination, there's still only 24 hours in a day. Some people will get up, go and do whatever they're doing with their customer in the office or whatever, and then spend too much time there, and then go out and have meals with their colleagues or whatever. And so you have to push that back, and you have to say, look, I've got to do this, I've got a session I've got to do, and make the time.
Yeah. It's great to hear, because I mean, actually, we were in a very similar situation, because I was actually traveling a lot also in the period leading up to Manchester. So, I found myself sometimes in India, for example, in a gym, no bike, or if it was the bike, it was that techno gym bike, the one with that's this big, designed for.
I spent plenty of time on those.
So, I was also using step walkers. I was doing, actually doing gym work, and plyometric work, right up actually pretty close too, because if I didn't have access to a bike, I was thinking to myself, okay, how else do I replicate or simulate that kind of effort for my body, but not necessarily on a bike? Do you also do that, or do you also think about how to do that with your training?
Not so much. I mean, I'll scope out the hotels, go online and see what their gyms look like, if they've got photos. Sometimes they're legitimate photos. Sometimes you go to the gym and find that it's a pile of rubbish. And sometimes you just have to roll with it. For example, there've been times that, using those techno gym style sit up and beg bikes, quite often they top out at about 500 watts. So if you're trying to do, a Tabata session where you're doing real short bursty sprints, you simply can't. And you just have to adapt your session to try and cope with that. And there have been times I've ended up going on a stepper instead of a bike, and I point blank refuse to use a recumbent bike. I don't know what it is about them, but it hurts my legs, but not in a good way.
Same for me. Okay, that's great practical tips and advice. I mean, because what I hear from you is clearly it's being very mindful, right? I mean, as you said, scheduling your meetings in such a way that you can get your training in. I mean, we do know physiologically that doing particularly power kind of training is much better in the morning than later in the day. Also, of course, if you are doing really high intensity stuff in the evening, because it raises your core temperature, that can also affect your sleep patterns, right? So, I mean, I do something very similar. I try to do it in the morning if I can, and then think about also what you're eating. I mean, how do you manage that? Because, you're often going from meeting to meeting, or you've got the hotel buffet there all the time. How do you keep that in check?
I try. I usually fail. Eating is a real challenge, or rather, not eating is the challenge, I should say. And I definitely overdo it. Because I travel a lot, I get access to the airport lounges as well, so it's food on tap everywhere I'm going. And invariably, I get home and I look at the scales and think, "Ouch, I've overdone it."
Okay.
And
but I guess one of the things that Alan said to me, my coach preparing for Manchester, is look, an extra kilo or two. It's not like you're really hitting the climbs and you're doing where the vertical meters start to really kick in. So we saw it in Manchester. There's a lot of people in Manchester who are carrying a little bit of extra weight, when you look at the sprinters that we saw. But yeah, so I guess that also works in. Andy, I'd like to hear a little bit as well about, you're married, you have an 11-year-old daughter. What advice would you give to others about, how you juggle what you're talking about? Because it's not just your work and your travel you're talking about. You also have a wife, you also have a daughter. How do you make that fit together?
That's also a challenge. They need to be very understanding, let's say. To compound it, so my wife is from Spain, and so they'll go across to Spain to visit her family during Easter and summer. So they might be away for 2-3 weeks during Easter, or obviously even longer during the summer. Mm-hmm. And that kind of makes things a little bit easier. I'll stay here because obviously I've got work that I have to do, so I can't go off for that amount of time. Mm. But I'm well, in normal years, road racing pretty much every weekend, and then track in other parts of the year. And it is a challenge. But at the moment, I'm encouraging my daughter to come out with me on the bike at the moment. I gave her a 7-day challenge. She wants a trampoline.
Okay.
And so I said, you need to earn one. So if you come out with me for a 10-kilometer or 1-hour ride, whichever is longer, every day for 7 days. And that's been fantastic. We've had good weather. Cool. We're allowed out, and I think she's enjoying it. I know I am.
Cool. I was joking on our webinar yesterday with Mick Rogers and Alan Davis, about almost 2 months ago now, I bought for our family a giant e-bike, 700-watt e-bike, and I've pimped it with Di2 shifting and everything like that. So I'm heading out with my daughter. She's 15. My son is 13. And actually we really enjoy it. I mean, the kids like biking, but it's very nice actually, because we sit on. They're literally pacing me out on the road, doing 30 an hour, and I'm sitting behind them on my bike. But I think what you're alluding to here is, it is a little bit thinking a little bit creatively sometimes how we combine the passion for our sport and our parenting and our relationship. How about, like you mentioned, your wife, was she surprised when you became world champion? I mean, it's a big deal. I mean, it's really an achievement. So one of the things that I found is that when I started to actually get results at the international level, my wife kind of realized that actually she came to some of these events and came to the races, and she started to realize, well, actually her husband is not too bad. And she started to get a bit of a deeper understanding of not just what I do, but why I do it, because she got into that environment of the joy and the, just that incredible atmosphere you often have at these masters level events. How's your wife look at cycling, and does she kind of understand that satisfaction that it brings to you?
Yeah, I think there's a mix. So definitely surprised. I mean, I was surprised, so so you're surprised too. But I think it's a double-edged sword, because you're right. She's sitting there thinking that's impressive. That's world stage. But at the same time, it has an impact on relationships, and there's how to put it. Sacrifices involved. So I suspect there's an element of resentment towards the sport, because it takes me away from family life so much. So it's a mixed bag.
Yeah, I think that's something that my wife Anna and I have grappled with, and I think one of the things I've started to appreciate, particularly now this is my sort of year back, is I start to appreciate, Andy, that I can't make every year a big year, because actually the that does take a lot of commitment, not just from my wife, but from the kids and everything. And so, I kind of understand that also, that I have to give back to the family, to my wife, when she is very understanding. What's your view on that kind of give and take? And because, when you get a world championship or you get results, you want more often, you get excited, but then you have to step back a little bit, I find. What's your thinking around that?
That's an interesting one. I think it's this particular juncture has probably been quite good timing in that respect. So because there's no racing, I'm able to spend a lot more time. I'm not traveling. I'm still training, but so that's helped a lot to compensate for last year, for example. So we'll need to see what happens as the months go on. But you're right. It's give and take. So you have to put back.
Sure, sure, great. You know, it was, I can't, actually what we will do for everyone who's watching, the race that Andy and I competed against each other in, which was the 20K point score, it is available on YouTube. All of the videos were live cast. So we'll share the race with you afterwards. Incredible experience for me. Andy, I don't think I've tasted so much blood in a race ever in my career, because it was an
You and me
incredible,
both.
it was really an incredible experience. So we'll share that. But I did allude a little bit to what's next. So, I mean, when you think forward in your cycling career, I mean, I guess now you're almost 50. So where do you go from here? Because you're only, I guess, halfway through your life, right? So what do you see as future goals, future ambitions for you in the sport?
To a greater or lesser extent, more of the same. You hear people moaning about, oh my goodness, I'm going to be turning 50 soon. I've had the opposite attitude of looking forward to it, because that's move up a category
Yes,
and
yes, yeah,
maybe
we
not
go
have
up,
quite such a hard time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right. So I turn 50 next year in January, so definitely I'm going to be going to the world, doing whatever I can do there. The big change for that is the IP goes from 3K down to 2K, and I'm curious as to what kind of impact that has on how you approach it. So it's definitely a different approach.
Sure. So the individual pursuit becomes a sprint as opposed to a pursuit almost, right? Eight laps.
Practically, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then there are two events I really want to attack, and they're both at the British level. There's the British Masters Road Race Championships, which ironically I got silver last year.
Mm-hmm.
After a spate of international travel where I put on far too much weight, came back, and a day later I had to go down south to ride the race, and it was hilly. And I thought, I'll be happy with a top 10.
Okay. Good. So
So
national
there's that.
championship, and so British national championship will be something you'll aim for, and then anything else in mind?
And also the British National Circuit Race Champs. So again, I've had silver, and I've been fourth, but I've never managed to take that gold. So it's eluded me.
Right.
So those are two short-term targets, but longer-term, carry on riding, carry on racing as long as I'm fit to do it.
Doing what you're doing.
You know.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, when we were in Manchester, you know, I had the pleasure to share my pits area with the amazing Keith Oliver, who's an Australian who is now 78 years old, multiple world champion, still going strong. And you know, that was just so inspiring for me, Andy, meeting him and seeing his passion for the sport. So I certainly look forward to competing against you and with you for at least the next 30 years. I'm sure we'll be doing.
Oh yeah.
And I'd like just to thank you. I mean, it's fantastic, your openness, your enthusiasm and passion for the sport. So thanks for coming on with us. For all of you out there, our audience of This Cycling Life, thanks for joining us. If you do like this video, please do give us the thumbs up, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we look forward to seeing you on another episode of Leadership Bytes very soon.
Okay.